to say of this place? What to call it? Through time it has had many names. It was Pematic to some early native people. It was Sur de Monde National Monument. It was almost Mount Desert National Park. It did become Lafayette National Park, and today, well, today many mistakenly call it Arcadia. There is no R, but there are magnificent mountains scoured by ice millennia past. Constant sea working its ceaseless saltwater massage on granite shore. Gentle brooks whispering secrets we all might learn. Lovely lakes and ponds, their mirrored waters doubling their beauty. And the creatures who live on them. In them, around them, above them. Mountains, sea, brooks, ponds, animals, birds, history, people. These are Acadia. Then, now, always. Hello, I'm Jack Perkins, and this is Acadia National Park. Now, as anyone who has lived here can caution a newcomer, don't expect grandeur, if by grandeur you mean geysers spouting faithfully or mile-deep chasms carved into red rock. Nothing like that here. Acadia doesn't make a spectacle of itself. It makes a friend. And, as we shall see later, it needs friends. Now, what is the best way to come to know this friend? Well, to begin with, consider the eagle. An eagle knows Acadia from soaring its diverse lands. The heart of it covering much of Mount Desert Island. MDI, by the way, is the third largest island off the coast of the continental United States. To its eastern reaches on Schoodic Point. And many of the islands along the coast, especially the High Island, known by the name the French gave it, Île aux Hauts. Most of that great island is included in Acadia. And the many small islands along the coast, the eagle knows those as well. For earthbound visitors, the only soaring to be done is over the 3D relief map at Acadia's Visitor Center. Not quite the same. You look at models, you watch videos like this one, you read guidebooks, maps, pamphlets, but you don't meet Acadia till you get out in it. Spend energy, take time. You can do it quick and easy, many do. Head out to the famous Ocean Loop Road, say hello to some of Acadia's highlights. On your right, the precipice, a precipitous trail for the hardy. On your left, Sand Beach. Chilly water, not much beach, but the only one for miles that's not rock. Thunder Hole. Thundering if the push of surf and time of tide happen to be right. Interesting at any time, but potentially hazardous. Prudence and caution urged. On around Otter Point, the classic rock-bound coast of Maine. Come to Stanley Brook Road. Admire the triple-arched bridge raising a carriage road above the automobile road in one arch, the brook itself in another. As you approach the Jordan Pond House, look to your right and admire the craftsmanship of one of the carriage road gatehouses. Beyond Jordan Pond House, the two mountains known euphemistically as the Bubbles. And then the mountain among mountains, motor to the top of Cadillac, highest point on the coast of America, the spot where at certain times of year the sun first lights the continental U.S. So you've done the Loop Road and you've climbed Cadillac, you've seen the highlights, but you haven't seen Acadia. Acadia hides and invites you to seek. To find its hidden domains, the rush of solitude, the solace of beauty, and in any season of the year. In the spring, painted with the artist's most vibrant palette. In the summer, when nature and we feel most fully alive. In autumn, the fall of the year, the fall of pretension. Now we no longer have to look at leaves layered with summer's greens. We see now their true colors. And finally, in winter, the year's reality check. This is how it is in Acadia, and has been for millennia. $20,000 ago, there was ice over all. Cadillac Mountain covered by ice 3/4 of a mile thick. The glacial ice sheet, as it moved, gouged valleys into the ridge that crossed the island, scooped out glacial lakes, excavated Somes Sound, the only true fjord in North America. All this glaciers did, and then, over thousands of years, retreated, and Acadia was ready for people. It has always been a summer resort. The first tourists probably came, as many still do, for the seafood. 6,000 years ago, Proto-Indians deposited artifacts in this area, tools, and the bones of tuna fish. They must have gone to deep water in their canoes to get those. Those people either developed into or were replaced by what today are known as the red paint people. They wore a lot of makeup. They in turn were succeeded by several tribes of Abnaki Indians who gave us the birch bark culture we are familiar with. The men fishing, the women digging clams to dry for winter consumption, families living in their birch bark lodge summer homes. They had good lives here until the Europeans. Who was first? Don't know. Vikings, Leif Erikson, John Cabot sailing for the English? Maybe. The Portuguese explorer Esteban Gomez, certainly. He came in 1525, commissioned by the Spanish to find a passage through to the Pacific. 80 years later, it was the French explorer Samuel de Champlain, with 12 sailors and 2 Indian guides sailing along the Maine coast. And on September 6th, 1604, he crossed Frenchman's Bay, saw smoke rising from an Indian camp on Otter Creek, and so sailed that direction. But he came to shallow waters, which today are marked by a bell buoy, but weren't then, of course, and Champlain ran aground on a shallow ledge. Of what he saw around him that day, he wrote,
"This island is very high and cleft into 7 or 8 mountains, all in a line. The summits of most of them are bare of trees, nothing but rock. I named it Ile des Monts Déserts."
the Isle of Bare Mountains. Well, those were the explorers. The first European settlers were, again, Frenchmen, Jesuit missionaries who set up camp near Chief Astacou's Indians at the entrance to Somes Sound and began trying to convert them. They had only a few weeks to do it before along came a gunboat full of Englishmen assigned to wipe out any vestiges of the French on the coast, which they did. And all that began a century and a half of on and off warfare between the French and the English to control this land and these waters. Over the years, many vain and pretentious folk show up in Acadia's album. Consider Antoine Lomé. He was a Frenchman, a commoner, who inveigled a grant to the lands of Acadia, but before traveling to the New World, decided he ought to have a title. So he made up a title. Sieur de Cadillac, he named himself, concocted a fake family coat of arms, of which you still see a version on the back of a Cadillac, driving up Cadillac. A few decades later, after American independence, consider Madame Barthélemy de Grégoire. She persuaded the legislature of Massachusetts, to which Maine still belonged, to give her the eastern half of Mount Desert Island and the adjoining mainlands. She set up housekeeping at Hull's Cove and began selling her newly acquired lands to the families who already lived there. Madame, in other words, was America's first real estate speculator. Most of the people were less colorful, more solid. Abraham Somes, Acadia's first permanent settler. After him are named Somesville and Somes Sound. He found a rugged land, a rugged life. The change in the character of Acadia began in the mid-1800s. Till then, the area was not written about as a place of beauty. Far from it. The poet John Greenleaf Whittier had seen it as a menacing specter.
The gray and thunder-smitten pile which marks afar the desert isle, there gloomily against the sky the dark isles raise their summits high, and desert rock, abrupt and bare, lifts its gray turrets in the air.
So said the poet. But then came the artists, those of the Hudson River School of American painters, beginning with one of the leaders of that movement, Thomas Cole, who first came in 1844, sketched, painted, returned home, inspiring others quickly to follow. Frederick Church, Fitzhugh Lane, Sanford Robinson Gifford. Their personal stories of their Acadian visits and their paintings persuaded many friends back in the big cities of the East to come see for themselves. Prominent New York attorney Charles Tracy, traveling by boat and wagons, brought his wife, his children, even his piano to Abraham Somes' Tavern at Somesville. They loved their summer, and they too went home and spread the word. In fact, some years later, one of the Tracy daughters, who by then was Mrs. J.P. Morgan, got that famous financier to start vacationing here as well. With its growing popularity, Acadia had to grow. Taverns and boarding houses became hotels. Hotels became bigger hotels. At one point, the renowned Rodick House in Bar Harbor was the largest summer resort hotel in the nation. And the cottages. You see, the wealthy who in the late 19th century made Bar Harbor a renowned social capital with self-effacing modesty called their 80 or 100-room mansions cottages. Some cottages. In the late 1800s, to Acadia came something remarkable. Today, to get to the top of Cadillac Mountain, you can drive or you can hike. There are many trail options up the mountain. But imagine climbing the mountain by railroad. Back in the 1880s, a businessman named Francis Clerg had the idea. A cog railway was built to ascend to the peak of what was then called Green Mountain. People would come from Bar Harbor to Eagle Lake by road, then board a stern-wheel steam paddle boat, the Wawinet, to cross over to the base of the mountain, where they would board open cars, and a little engine would fire up and chug away, and for 30 minutes, up they would go. At the summit, they would find, of all things, a hotel. The Summit House, with a large dining room, sleeping rooms for 50. The round trip by road, boat, and railroad cost $2.50. 3,000 people took the trip the first season. Still, after 8 years, the owners chose to give up on the Green Mountain Railway. It went out of business, but nonetheless, it was a turning point in Acadia's history. For a few years later, that cog railway was the incentive for a small group of men to do whatever they had to keep such eyesores, such despoiling intrusions as they saw the railroad from ever happening again. At their first opportunity, they would buy that mountain, clear away the bones of the railway and the hotel. The mountain would become the centerpiece of Acadia, protected forever. Who were these men, Acadia's forefathers? I'll call them horse and buggy men who foresaw the coming of the automobile and the changes that would follow, and realized if anyone were going to protect and preserve this precious place, it had to be now, and it had to be they. Charles Eliot, Professor Eliot, for 40 years President Eliot of Harvard. It was he who had the foresight to start the preservation effort in 1901, calling together a few other like-minded men, including George B. Dorr, a distinguished gentleman from Boston who, from his home Old Farm on the shore near Bar Harbor, became president of the group created to gather lands, purchasing some, persuading donations of others, and slowly assembling the vital core of what would become the national park. Dr. Robert Abbey, a world-renowned physician, in fact the first in America to introduce radiation therapy against cancer. He was a summer resident of Bar Harbor and an avid amateur archaeologist, researching and gathering relics representing 10,000 years of native life around Acadia, a peerless collection to be housed in the now famous Abbey Museum. Also add another hero to our story, a family of heroes actually. The Rockefeller family was and remains essential to the story of Acadia. John D. Rockefeller, founder of Standard Oil, which at its peak controlled 90% of all the oil in America, was probably the richest man in the country. but was certainly one of the least ostentatious. As was his son, John D. Jr., who, when he came to love vacationing in Maine, carefully steered clear of the Tony society-page resorts of Bar Harbor, instead taking his family on the ferry Norumbega on around the island to the southern edge to Seal Harbor, where they settled comfortably each summer into a home they called the Eyrie. From its height, it reminded them of the view an eagle must have from a nest on high. And one of John D.'s children would long remember arriving each summer.
My parents brought me here first for the summer of 1915, which was the year I was born. And as we did for many years, they came up on the Bar Harbor Express, which started in Washington, stopped in Baltimore and New York, and then Boston. I very much enjoyed riding overnight on the train and hearing the click of the wheels under me, and it was an expedition that we all quite enjoyed. We landed at Hancock Point, where we got off and got onto a boat and had lunch. Arrived at Seal Harbor about 2 o'clock. In short, it was quite a production. The home that we lived in all of my younger life, and I think of with much pleasure, was the Eyrie, which was a big frame wooden house that the family had bought years before I was born and had enlarged. It added a number of wings. So it was quite a conspicuous house.
At the Eyrie, the unostentatious John D. Jr. was far from the social soirees of Bar Harbor, but was close to what he loved most, the lands and vistas that spread all around him. Across those lands, he began building a series of carriage roads. Horse and carriage riding was one of his gentle pleasures.
Well, Father by nature, I think, was a builder. He built wonderful things from Rockefeller Center to the cloisters in New York, repaired the roofs on Versailles, so that it was not surprising that when he came here and acquired land, he was very interested in building roads and building bridges to cross the streams. And he started that when I was a very small child, but soon after I was able to ride horseback and would sometimes ride with him, we would watch the construction of the roads and of the bridges. And that's a memory that is one that I cherish. It was fun to be with him and to see the construction of the roads. My father loved building and loved the details of construction. And he loved making sure that what was being done was just right. And he was not satisfied without going out to observe himself the roads under construction. And he would, before they were built, walk the line that was being proposed for the roads. So he played a very personal role, much more than just paying for the roads, in the construction of the roads.
Some of those roads he had built were engineering marvels of his time and still today, carved from sheer cliff without the sophisticated equipment of now. He built some of the roads on land he already owned, some on land he purchased for the purpose and then ultimately gave to the government. In all, over 50 miles of carriage roads, nothing like it in any other park in the country. Oh, and for many, the crowning glories, the 17 magnificent rock bridges Rockefeller had designed to carry his roads over streams, valleys, under public thoroughfares, their like is unequaled. And the Rockefellers and others of like mind who had gathered, preserved, and built Acadia enjoyed it. The clip-clop of horses pulling their stately carriages toward Jordan Pond. As hard as it was to pull together all the lands and build the roads and the bridges, even harder would it be to give them away. The founders wanted the federal government to accept them and make them a national park. That seemed obvious, but the obvious is not always easy. There were debate and delay and bureaucratic inertia, but fortunately there was also George B. Dorr. Imposing man with many Washington contacts and a singular determination. He came to head the committee assembling the precious lands and then undertook what would be the arduous process, taking years to get the U.S. government to accept donation of those lands. The national park movement had begun out west with Yellowstone in 1872. 44 years later, the Sur de Mont National Monument, as Acadia was first called, was officially born in 1916. And named to supervise it, George B. Dorr. Its budget in its first full fiscal year, $150. To get more money for the park, Dorr called on a friend, former President Teddy Roosevelt, who wrote a letter to the recalcitrant chairman of the Appropriations Committee to plead for the new park. He wrote,
"It is our one eastern national park. Its striking ocean frontage makes it unlike any other that we have. It will furnish a health-giving playground, greatly needed by multitudes of hard-working men and women. It constitutes also a wildlife sanctuary under national guardianship at a point where such a sanctuary is greatly needed."
The budget was raised from $150 to $10,000. And the name changed, still French, but more familiar across the land. Lafayette National Park it became for 10 years, whereupon the name changed once again to Acadia. The early 20th century proved the golden age for Acadia. A world-renowned social capital it became as famous families with names like Pulitzer, J.P. Morgan, Vanderbilt, Stotesbury overbuilt their cottages. That was the golden age, but ages pass and gold can melt in fire. Autumn of 1947, in a dump near Northeast Creek, a fire starts and spreads through the lands of Acadia and its towns, rages frightfully for 3 days. And today, you'd hardly know. Today, Acadia still invites the wanderer and the wanderer. For the wanderer, a carriage ride from Wildwood Stables up and around beautiful Day Mountain. For the wanderer, perhaps a hike. What varied opportunities await. To start, how about the trail up the back of the South Bubble to find that glacial erratic called Bubble Rock? And to gaze down on Jordan Pond and the Jordan Pond House. There's another trail threading treacherously up what's called the precipice, and yes, it is precipitous, not for street shoes or faint hearts. Nor is the face of Otter Point, where supervised technical rock climbing is popular. To embrace the classic rock-bound coast, the Ocean Trail runs out by Otter Point. The Great Head Trail rises high above Sand Beach. There's a trail up the hill called the Beehive. Also for the wanderer, a unique step trail up Door Mountain. There are trails up the sides of Cadillac Mountain, or if you prefer, down. Another atop Acadia Mountain affords a grand view of that fjord, Somes Sound. Along Echo Lake, up Beach Mountain to an old, now unused fire tower. There are trails like the Great Meadow Trail that connect the park with the town of Bar Harbor. And of course, all those carriage roads. Plenty of places to go by foot or by 4 feet. Or by a couple of wheels. Or by oar or paddle, setting adrift on a placid pond. If you prefer saltwater paddling, sea kayaks along the coast. Or head out with a park naturalist aboard the Sea Princess to get a feel for islands and island living, and hear again Rachel Field's classic poem.
You may chat with the neighbors of this and that, and close to your fire keep, but you'll hear the ship whistle, the lighthouse bell, and the tide beat through your sleep. Oh, you don't know how, and you don't know why, such a change upon you came, but once you have slept on an island, you'll never be quite the same. So I hope you folks continue to enjoy our coastal history, our coastal Maine islands.
Visit Little Cranberry Island, the village of Islesford, where the park offers a museum of island life.
Professor William Otis Sawtell. Now, he was born in Bangor in 1874. He came here in 1903 and he fell in love with the island. Now, I'm sure today you could see many reasons why someone would fall in love with this island.
Nearby is Baker Island with its own history and the right man to tell about it.
Welcome to Baker Island. This is the Elijah Gilley House that was built by Elijah, who was one of the original settlers' children out here. It was built in 1840. So this island was settled in 1806 by William and Hannah and they raised a dozen children out here on this remote offshore island. 6 boys, 6 girls. And I'm a descendant of Hannah. She was my great, 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 great aunt. So this is a special place for me to come and a place I love to share with others. In 1828, a lighthouse was erected here on Baker Island, and this would be the first lighthouse family on Baker.
Many opportunities for the wanderer, and for the wanderer, much to learn.
So Diver Ed's gonna head down to the bottom of Frenchman Bay and show us what's down there at the Dive-In Theater. And off he goes. Goodbye, Diver Ed. Looks like Diver Ed has found us a sea star. Pretty common here in Frenchman Bay, very pretty. They're echinoderms, which means spiny skin. You guys will see that when it comes back up to the boat. You can feel that and feel just how spiny it is. So we're looking at a toad crab, one of the smaller crabs that we see down at the bottom of Frenchman Bay. These claws are not going to do much for offense or for defense, so instead they choose to camouflage themselves. So they'll scrape things off rocks, they'll pull things off plants, and then they'll put them on top of themselves for camouflage.
These mountains give us a fantastic opportunity to look into the core of an ancient volcano, because we know, geologists tell us, that the granite that makes up these mountains was formed about 420 million years ago from the solidifying of magma, molten rock, at extremely high temperatures. We know that there was once hundreds and hundreds of feet, perhaps thousands of feet of sedimentary rock and other types of rock on top of Cadillac Mountain. And so what we're looking at today is kind of the middle of the magma chamber that would have been deep within the earth when these minerals cooled.
If we want to find where this rock came from, you got to take a chunk of it, start matching it up with the rock underneath your feet. You're going to have to keep walking and go about 30 miles from the north of here to the town of Lucerne, Maine. You're going to find that this rock is all over in the mountains there. It was picked up there, came down to the south, then dropped here on top of Cadillac Mountain, like a giant conveyor belt came out of the north. We call those conveyor belts glaciers. We call this a glacial erratic, dropped as those glaciers left a good 10 to 15,000 years ago.
Glaciers, volcanoes, scraping, shatter zones, many, many changes have happened to these rocks over eons and eons. I used to think that you had to go out west to see really good rock up close and personal, until I came to Acadia National Park and I realized it is everywhere. If you like rocks, this is certainly a good place to see them.
Take a look at this evergreen and notice how long the needles are. And I also want you to notice how more than one needle comes out of the same place. That makes it a pine tree. Now we can figure out what kind of pine tree it is by how many needles come out of the same place.
All right, so you look down into the tide pools, and sometimes you just never know what you're gonna find. Here's a little sea urchin. And with all these different things that are in the tide pools, you may wonder, well, why are they so important? Because they can play a nursery for both plant-like algae as well as animal-like creatures, and also that every organism, both plant-like and animal-like, that lives in these tide pools also has a role or a niche to play in the survival of many ocean creatures.
As we're enjoying this beautiful stone bridge, it's just one of 17 bridges and miles of carriage road that John D. Rockefeller Jr. built. And when he built them, it all became part of a legacy that he and others are leaving to us to maintain for future generations.
If one of the things a wanderer wonders is, how could I help Acadia? There's an answer. The answer is a group named Friends of Acadia. Founded back in the 80s, Friends of Acadia has raised millions of dollars over the years, money for Acadia to preserve the carriage roads in perpetuity, to bring back to life a network of hiking trails, many fallen into impassable disrepair, to help fund, with great support from the L.L. Bean Company, the innovative development of the island-wide bus network, carrying visitors in and around Acadia in propane-powered vehicles that themselves help Acadia by keeping the air clean. To enable its work, Friends of Acadia, of course, welcomes contributions. And not just money. It enlists volunteers. Hundreds come from all parts of the country to work on trails, build bridges, clear away brush. It also fields a summer corps of paid young people called Ridge Runners who help and guide folks along the ever-expanding network of Acadian trails.
Well, I think Friends of Acadia have played a very important and constructive role, have certainly supported projects that would be useful in terms of the maintenance of the trails, for example. They had groups of volunteers who worked on the trails in a way that the park couldn't afford to do.
Volunteerism to me is a way to give back. Having had a wonderful life, it's a chance to really do some wonderful things. And we found an organization called Friends of Acadia that organizes it in a way that everyone is productive immediately. It's not waiting around in groups, and it does phenomenal things for the park. I've traveled around the country and seen the conditions of some of the other parks and the trails, and then I come back here and it redoubles my effort to want to do more.
I think the Friends of Acadia program for the park has meant extra hands. A number of years ago, the Friends of Acadia realized that there was really not enough people to help the park due to governmental cutbacks. So we provide thousands of hours a summer that are extra hands to the people that maintain the trails and maintain the carriage roads. And we're able to bring up things to the standard that the park wants.
Friends of Acadia carries on the great heritage of the founders of Acadia, private citizens protecting public lands, not for themselves, but for us all. That sort of stewardship was the spirit of Acadia back then, is the spirit of Acadia now, but in the future? I'm wondering, in titling this program Acadia Always, were we perhaps a bit too optimistic? Oh, the sea and the shore will always be here, perhaps in different configurations. But what about the park? What about Acadia the park, needing help and support and love? Will it always find those? The ominous fact is that today, fewer and fewer young people care about national parks. Fewer go to national parks. Does that mean that as they grow up, fewer will support national parks? It's a cause for concern.
It does appear that there is a growing disconnect between today's youth and the out of doors. We want children to experience Acadia National Park rather than just watch it on a screen.
As park superintendent, Steele has worked to address that disconnect between youth and the great outdoors. Of course, there have always been fun things for kids to do around Acadia, from the days of the Rockefeller kids and their friends, right up to the present. All kinds of play.
Adam scrambled up a nearby stone wall.
But the park works intentionally to entice kids into more than just play. It has special educational programs for young people. And what would interest kids? Well, how about something called slippery, slimy, creepy, crawly?
Okay, so why do we look at this stuff close up? Take a close look. What do you see? All those little things we saw with all the different legs, the jointed legs and the eyes. When you look at these things close up, you get to know their habits and their habitat. You want to take care of them, right? Yeah!
What'd you guys find? You got another boatman beetle? Excellent. So these two aquatic insects referred to as macroinvertebrates. They're called macro because we don't need a magnifying lens or a microscope in order to be able to see them. They're fairly large. They don't have vertebrae, which are your backbones, right? So these are referred to as macroinvertebrates.
The sea cucumber. Now remember, our sea star is a watery animal. It brings in water and releases it, changes its body form, allows it to move around successfully. Our sea cucumber can do that too.
What do you think created that rounded mountain? Anyone know? Glaciers! Exactly! And so what happened, this is the story of Acadia. All of this stuff was created by geology, changing land and processes that go on, heat and pressure. Remember? Metamorphosis. Ooh, ooh, ooh. All this stuff, they're clues to figure out the mystery.
Kids who work really hard at various programs can earn a coveted designation of Junior Ranger, patch and all.
Big round of applause. There are new Junior Rangers.
When the park inherited the old Navy base on Scudic Point, the question was what to do with it. A good answer: invite young people for 3-day overnight camps in nature exploration.
We just dialed it to north. Now we have to set it to north. Hold it flat and turn the compass until red is inside the shed.
Look what we found.
This is a starfish too. It's called a brittle star.
So this is green algae right here. This is what we have right here. No, not that, sorry.
This bit of coastline has inspired artists like Andrew Wyeth, Winslow Homer, poets like Emily Dickinson, writers like E.B. White, to write stories about the Maine environment.
Attempts to get young people interested and, more important, involved in Acadia now and into the future. Think about the future by recalling the past. A century ago, with the arrival of the automobile, some residents bemoaned, Mount Desert is ruined. Historian Samuel Eliot Morrison had a saner perspective.
We who love this island say it can never be ruined while the tide ebbs and flows twice a day, and an offshore wind turns the sea to an incredible blue. Or the east wind brings wreaths of fog that clothe the coast and hills in soft white. Mount Desert is not merely an island. It's a way of life to which one becomes addicted.
Addicted? It was Acadia addicts in the past who made this park, those in the present who work hard to preserve it. So, be there still such addicts in the future, there will be an Acadia. Always.